Welcome back to Trending in Education. Dan Strafford, Mike Palmer, and Brandon Jones back with us to talk about the Gartner Hype Cycle 2019 edition. Always fun to get hyped up here on Trending in Ed. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm amped. I'm excited. We've done this two times before. This is our third turn of the crank, or this is our third or fourth turn of the crank. We'll confirm that downstream. But we've been tracking these hype cycles last 3 years, I believe, and excited as always to have Brandon back, but especially to have Brandon back to talk about the hype cycle because we all kind of discovered it together. We've been riding the hype cycle, and for those of you who aren't aware of it, you're about to be turned on to something pretty interesting. And I'm excited to dig in.
Yeah, some number of crank turns ago, we discovered getting smarter with Gartner.
Yes.
It's a yearly tradition. Thank you, gents, for inviting me back to participate in this tradition. I'm excited. I'm hyped.
Yeah. So maybe just to get the backstory going, right? So we first discovered it, I think, off cycle, if I remember correctly, and it was maybe middle of the year, and we were getting caught up on the hype cycle from the year before. And I think it was even year one when we started talking about Smart Dust. And then I know Smart Dust came back, and there's some callbacks to previous shows that have become part of the history of trending in education, breaking down the Gartner hype cycle. So I would, we're going to try to make this, fresh and engaging for somebody who's coming in who hasn't listened to the previous versions. But you may want to go back to our back catalog, check out our 2017 hype cycle, 2018 hype cycle. We're not gonna try to rely on that as a base level of knowledge, but your understanding will be better if you do that. And it is really interesting to look at this over 3 years too, right? So what stays on the hype cycle, what isn't covered. But Smart Dust, Brandon, was something that I knew we would be returning to.
Of course, I've gotten a little smart dusty though, to be honest. I don't know if you can hear to my voice, but I'm a little verklempt because it's not on the hype cycle this year.
Exactly, right?
Yeah, so that was 2 years of Smart Dust. And for folks who don't know about Smart Dust, please listen to the back catalog. You can hear me wax poetic about it. It was going to be the thing that solved all things. All you would need is Smart Dust. You need nothing other than Smart Dust because Smart Dust was going to be everything.
Yeah.
And, yes, it was many years out per the hype cycle time horizon. But it's so far out now that it's not even on the curve.
Right.
It's bad. I'm pouring one out for Smart Dust from the cup that I've made from Smart Dust. I pour one out for you.
Yeah.
Smart Dust. I hope you return to the hype cycle next year and for many years to come.
And just to be clear, Smart Dust is still also far out, as in
far
out, man.
Yeah,
but it's also So I think just for folks who this may be their first exposure to the Gartner hype cycle, let's begin by giving them some context around what the Gartner hype cycle is. So which of my two esteemed colleagues on the show wants to take a stab at providing the basic framework that is the Gartner hype cycle?
I'm happy to take
Dan.
a crack at that. So it's a hype cycle on emerging technologies that are going to influence technology, society as a whole, education, sort of the whole depth and breadth of everyday life that Gartner does research on and projects out in two different forms. One, where they are along the hype cycle, which we can talk about those different stops along the hype cycle, but also how far out they are. What time frame they are in. So in reading the hype cycle or looking at the image that is provided, you'd want to understand both where it is on the cycle itself, which looks sort of like a roller coaster ride, if you will, going up the hill and then back down and up again, and also how far out they are. So there are different keys to both. But that is the hype cycle in a nutshell. And as we've discovered it over the few years and discussed it, we've seen things climb up. You hear the innovation trigger, the peak of inflated expectations, the trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and then the plateau of productivity are the terms you'll hear throughout here as we discuss through some of these topics.
Yeah, and just to build on that, wonderful language. Part of what drew us to this was that the sort of the narrative arc that these hypeable things go through, where innovation trigger, inception, not as exciting, but then peak of inflated expectations. We all know what that means. Trough of disillusionment, boy howdy, we know what that means. And then on the other side, the slope of enlightenment, the plateau of productivity. It's kind of a wonderful like narrative language that's describing how innovations and ideas excite the imagination. Then they go through some reality check, and then best case they rally and mature into something that's productive over time. What's interesting about this year relative to previous years is that it's very front loaded. So like they're not really showing much beyond from inception to peak of inflated expectations into beginning to decline into that trough. And then everything beyond that is kind of off their radar. They don't care as much about that. And that was a bit of a change from previous years. So I don't know if either of you guys want to get in on that, but I think that, the language is wonderful. Like the kind of looks like a roller coaster. I also think it looks like an action potential. If you're looking at how like a nerve signal is triggered and it goes boom, and then it goes, whoa, and then it goes back to like steady. But Brandon, any thoughts from you on just the whole, narrative arc of the hype cycle and how this year feels a little different than maybe previous years?
Yeah, although I will say I am a little distracted by the activation potential and the boom and the whoa. I think you managed to wrap up quite a lot going on in that description. So I do have a few thoughts, and I think we have. I think throwing shade is uncharitable for what we did last year, but we hoped to inspire Gartner to
Right.
do a little bit different. Take a little a different tack with their presentation of this, because it's super interesting. And what this begs for me, or what I would really want from this, is something that tracks these points on this graph over time.
Yes.
So, it's imagine, and you see it all over the place today, which is why Gartner, can't we see it from you?
Right.
Something that has some interactivity. So
Mm-hmm.
and slide your cursor along and see where things are at different points, or you can press play on the Gartner hype cycles that have been overlaid one another from the last however many years.
Yep.
Because I do think that there is some meta commentary through the lens of the Gartner hype cycle. So one is just, Mike, as you discussed, is that there's literally nothing that has made it all the way into the trough of disillusionment,
Right.
and nothing that makes it out. So I to me, one could interpret, and I might be one of those ones who could interpret this and say, it is less interesting to Gartner or to whomever for to be looking at or opining on technology that's been around a little longer and
Right.
may have made it out. And I think just that fact is actually pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Another related point that I haven't gone back and looked at the other graphs, because I was just hoping that Gartner would do it for me,
Yeah.
is to take a look. They have, as Dan was describing it, one other thing to add, they have the different color-coded points on the graph. So it's when the plateau for these products or these technologies or these trends will be achieved. So the different categories are less than 2 years, 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, more than 10 years, and then a really bleak one, obsolete before the plateau.
Right.
But I think it's interesting to look. There's a lot of stuff in here that is 5 to 10 years or more than 5 to 10 years out. Just eyeballing it, it looks like more of the emerging things that they cite are in those buckets.
Yep.
And I think that's another thing to look at over time is Gartner graphing, are they plotting things that are more proximate or less proximate,
Right.
relative to previous years? How many yellow dots are there versus how many unfilled dots? And I think that would be an interesting thing to see. And also, I guess last related point on that is, we've talked a little bit about this with Rohit from the non-obvious trends.
Mm-hmm.
Things that 5 years ago were expected to have achieved the plateau in 5 years or less. It'd be interesting to take stock of how those things have done.
Right.
So there is, to me, I love the 2019 version, but I'm really excited about the prospect of taking a look at where Gartner has been as it looks forward to where the world is going.
Right. I do want to point out one thing, difference in the graphs as I pulled them up here, is that this year it does have an obsolete option for timing. So you have the 2 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 years. There's now obsolete before, see if I can get the exact wording here, obsolete before plateau. They have as one of the timetables that has not existed before. So as we talk through that and look at the comparison, and maybe we can do some graphical overlays ourselves. I can play around with these graphs that we have to see the differences and see how they play off one another. But the evolution of the Gartner Hype Cycle itself and how they're presenting the data and how they're showing it, I do think, to your point, Brandon, is really interesting in how they're developing it. And are they looking back at their own work? To your point, are they doing that development work to see how things are progressing and how they're even presenting it? Mike, we talked about the Holan IQ,
right,
and that picture superiority and how great that was. It seems like Gartner has a lot of data here, but isn't necessarily presenting it as well as some of these other studies we've been looking at.
Yeah, I got a meta hot take on this. It's a hot meta take. I'm not sure. It's one or the other, maybe a little bit of both. But I think the Gartner Hype Cycle may be in the Gartner Hype Cycle, and the Gartner Hype Cycle may be heading into the trough of disillusionment.
Hey-oh.
Yeah. So Gartner, we want to get smarter with you. We want you to rally here because this was super zeitgeisty, really cool stuff when we discovered it. Feels like you're ripe for disruption unless you sort of you get a little frisky defending turf here. And I think it also feels like maybe they're putting more behind the paywall. Like I'm not really sure, but it does, they're targeting, chief technology officers, folks who really want to be cutting edge, R&D departments. So like it is, and we'll get into the nuts and bolts of a lot of the language and a lot of the shape of what's emerging in the trend curve, which is why, this is coming out of a place of love. Like we are aspirational around what this could become, but like, it does feel like what maybe was more of a holistic, more of, not just looking at the bubble side of the hype cycle, but also looking at the long-term return on investment around these types of technologies. I enjoyed when it was that full lifespan because it also put the hype part in context. And if anything, only looking at the front end of the hype cycle and talking to, R&D functions and chief technologists and folks in the venture space, it almost feeds bubbles and it doesn't really talk about what's going to make it through and actually power the next 5 to 10 years. So that was my meta hot take, a little shot across the bow to Gartner, but this coming from a place of love. We'd love to have more representation from them on the show, but that's generally my take. And then the other like sort of set, like that's take one, and take 1A is like, it's all AI. And they kind of mailed it in a little there too, where like I used to hear more about the blockchain, no mention of the blockchain here. We used to talk about smart dust, cyber prosthetics, like a lot of stuff that maybe there's one or a few references in. It used to be a little more broad brush. So now I would say it feels a little more like they're drinking deep of the AI Kool-Aid. And I think there's more emerging than just AI. So those are my the meta take is maybe the hype cycle itself is heading into a bit of a trough. And then the other one is they're over-indexing around like a potential AI bubble. But then the details and the words and the language, really interesting, definitely worth checking out. I'd love to get into that with the rest of you guys.
Coming in spicy.
You like it? You like it?
That. Yeah.
Yeah.
I will also say if I'm ever changing my name a la Rano Test, I will be Meta Hot Take instead of Meta World Peace. So
it's pretty good.
That is on the docket in the future if I ever need a stage name. But there are 5 buckets here that they talk about in the emerging technologies trends. This is what Mike was just discussing, the words and language they're using to describe these different topics. And Brandon, I know you love lists.
I do love a list.
So I don't know if you'd like me to read you the list for old times or if you'd like to take a crack at
old times time. I never liked when those old times weren't old. I never liked when you read the list. I always wanted that action. So I'm your Huckleberry.
All right. Well,
Yeah. So the five buckets, and I think it's probably worth spending just a beat on each of them after I read this, and I won't do the beat spending. I'll just do the list reading, and then we can all discuss. But the five buckets are sensing and mobility, one, augmented human, post-classical compute and comms.
Yeah, I think that one might have still been in copy editing, but the deadline the deadline hit. Yeah, yeah.
Digital ecosystems, and advanced AI and analytics. And I will say before we get into the going through each of these buckets and what they mean, I think that's helpful. Hopefully, that's part of the reason the listeners are listening.
Yep.
To understand what those exciting emerging trends are. AI is throughout a lot of these. So there is a bucket called, as I just read it, advanced AI and analytics, but there is AI in others of those buckets too. So I agree. And I'm not sure whether Gartner is, how much of an influence they are on this versus how faithfully they are reporting back the trend. But either the trend that it is AI for X, right, which we've been talking about for a number of years,
yep,
as the thing that is going to be, if you sort of bucket up into the big thing that's going to have a big impact on everything in the future, and also the interest in early stage emerging technologies that may be actually reflective of where we all are. So, I think interesting, possible back to the meta. There's more conversation maybe to be had there, but it may be worth going through and just unpacking a little bit what each of these buckets are.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, nice. I appreciate your take. If I had some tea, it may be like a nice like Darjeeling that I gently steeped. It wasn't particularly it wasn't like a really strong, like heavily caffeinated tea, but it was a very fair take. It was very fair, equitable take on your part. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, we're there's cops and we can play both sides here. And we do heart Gartner.
We do. And I think honestly, despite my weak tea take on your take, I think it's actually fair. It does seem it's reflective of where it is reflective of a lot of capital and focus going into early stage AI bets that are going to take a little while to come to fruition.
Yeah, I think that's right.
If we
go ahead,
well, if we dive into, I think where I would assume, Brendan, you might want to augmented humans, because we've talked before about you plugging right in.
Neuralink, right in the back of my neck.
Yeah, I mean, are they in order for a reason, do we think?
I think it's alphabetical.
Okay.
That would be, yeah. So
as long as we systematically hit all five.
No, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, sensing and mobility starts first. So, it's S, A, B, C. I think it's alphabetical. So, I'm not sure. I think it's just how the copy editor decided to put it together.
Oh, that was good.
So sensing and mobility, though, Brandon.
Let's do that one first.
That's first.
First day list. Yeah. So, and this is a bucket. These are themes, and I think it's actually helpful. There's 29 technologies or 29 trends that Gartner is plotting on this graph, and bucketing it into five I think it's really helpful. So, this is a bunch of things in here around sensing mobility, I guess is the language they use, but things that are both sensing and things that are more mobile. So 3D sensing cameras, autonomous driving, drone technology, all of that falls into this bucket. And the idea is that as there's more capability with these various technologies, it's going to unlock more technology, right? So, and with it references IoT, Internet of Things. Basically, everything is connected now, and the more capabilities that these sensing technologies have, the more they can plug into the just vast network of things that exist that are connected.
Right.
Yep.
And so I personally think that this is right on. Like, there's going to be, whether it's Amazon delivery drones or really getting autonomous cars out on the road. These are variously in the 2 to 5 to 10 years out there. So not all these things are like tomorrow you're going to see this, but we've talked a lot on this show, not just about this topic, but about following the money.
Right.
Where there is a benefit in either cost reduction or ability to reach additional customers, I think that's a thing that I would be interested in also seeing is what the sort of economic impact of this is going to be. And my guess on this one is that the economic impact will be high.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think there's those new modes of sensing will change the personal engagement with technology, whether it's a smartphone or wearable tech. Like, it's more likely that that will sense your emotional state from how your face is responding. So like your heart rate, fitness technology is going to be moving forward because of these abilities to sense. And then increasingly the Internet of Things and smart bots and drones and such are going to be taking what used to be manufacturing work out of the human realm and begin to move it into a blended and increasingly non-human powered world. And then also all that sensing is going to feed an even bigger data collection capability that will allow for some of the more machine learning aspects of AI to kind of build that feedback system. So I did think the way they laid it out did begin to paint a picture around, like, again, kind of like how a CTO might think about it, where like on the one end, I'm going to need to do the automation, sensing, sort of replace the sort of the legacy industrial manufacturing model with some new modes. And that's kind of the first one. And that'll have a lot of like retail consumer implications too. Do you guys have any thoughts on that too? Like, we talk about it from like a learning perspective. Like, if we're thinking about this first category, any specific relevance that might have to folks who are interested in education and learning?
Yeah, I think that all the sensing, the camera-based stuff, there's an opportunity for enhancing teachers' capabilities in the classroom. So there have been these 360 cameras for a long time, but they've been pretty expensive, and the output has been pretty it's pretty intense even just to consume the output from them. I can imagine, and I think there's some negative implications of this too that I can imagine pretty easily. But I can imagine having watching technology in the classroom that is identifying, relative alertness, engagement of students when, literally putting, or I guess not literally, but figuratively putting those eyes in the back of teachers' heads.
Yeah.
I think that is interesting. And if you can downplay the negative side of that, I think there could be some real classroom enhancements that come from it.
Well, we just talked recently, Mike, about the better ball idea, and a lot of that was the 3D technology around pitch tracking and understanding the physical. So from the physical sense here, getting the teaching of baseball or teaching of any sort of physical activity would lend here pretty well, I think, as tracking people's movements and understanding how to rate themselves in that way.
Yeah.
The thing I found really intriguing here is the idea that the regulations are what's hampering this phase the most. So the government's involvement, state, local, federal here in the United States, how much that's slowing them down. Now, that happens in a lot of industries that innovation slows down because of regulation, but intriguing to see how these companies go to bat in Washington or on the state and local level to try to open up drones to deliver. Like, what sort of laws need to be passed to allow that, and how much time will that take in and of itself?
100%. Yeah. And even, how much will the political realm begin to be activated by this? One of the reasons why Andrew Yang has activated a lot of people's imaginations as a real dark horse candidate who's unlikely to win, but is really impacting the conversation, is the idea that he's very concerned about the future of work and is beginning to represent ways in which some thoughtful policy could protect the role of humanity through this transitional period that Gartner is kind of looking at. I think that is interesting. The last note that I wanted to add just on the teaching context is also the idea of biometrics. So like understanding, in addition to sort of emotional state through sensors or whatever, like if you could understand which of your students are tired
Right.
or anxious or uncomfortable for whatever reason, the kind of whole student movement, you don't really get at that until you have a better read on some of that data. I think it will be really challenging if you look at GDPR and data privacy as an increasing problem to navigate. I think there's going to be challenges to figure out which students are willing to offer up their data and like their biometrics to kind of optimize their performance. But I think those that do, with brands that they trust, will begin to unlock human potential in ways that we haven't really seen before, and that'll be an exciting trend to watch around learning and performance.
Let's move on to, and I think the opt-in, opt-out idea of that too. Like, can I opt into it? Can I opt out of it? Is it in the entire classroom? Will be one to follow as well. Augmented humans is next in our alphabetical list. As we go through, of course, the S after A. Brandon, are you ready?
Oh, I'm so ready. This is what I was not born for, but made for, as it turns out. Just plug me in, Elon. I'm ready. So there's all sorts of things in this bucket. New all the stuff, the biomed stuff, tissue growth. A lot of this is, and I think this is really great for people who are differently abled. There's beyond that, though, also the idea of creating superhuman capabilities. An example they give is a robotic arm that is stronger than a human arm. I think this is where we're getting into like mechs here, but this is really cool stuff that we as humans are limited more by our physical capabilities than by our mental or emotional capabilities. We're fantastical in terms of the things that we can imagine, and I think we aren't always, but can be extremely nuanced in the way in which we engage with other humans. But we can only run so fast or jump so far or carry so much, and obviously there's variation among people there too. But the idea that we can have technology that transcends that boundary that has existed for all of human existence is, to me, really interesting. And that there's all beyond all of the therapeutic parts of this, which are also obviously super interesting too. So I love this one. We've been joking about Neuralink, which is the Elon Musk company, which is planning to have the Matrix style thing go right in your brainstem and get you so that Taekwondo, which is perfect for higher ed, as we've talked about also. I'm all in on that. I'm all in on this bucket of emerging technologies.
Interestingly, I shared recently on Twitter, there's new technology. Didn't make the hype cycle, but it's a wearable seat. It's funny to contrast like what's just now possible that is different and is like just weird from what is exciting about what's 5 to 10 years out there. If you haven't seen it, we'll share it on Trending in Ed as a Twitter account, our Twitter account, which is a great follow at Trending in Ed. For those of you who are listening, tell your friends. But this thing, it's just like you walk around. It's when you're standing up, it's like there's these little things like on the backs of your legs, but then you can sit down anywhere you want. And like you get tired, you just sit down. Like that's because it's already in market. It's on the plateau of productivity. Wearable seats, it's here today, and that's just a scratch in the surface of augmented humanity. But and it reminds me also of Yuval Harari's book Homo Deus, which is a really good read. I've referenced it in the past, but it's basically talking about how new lines of thinking are emerging around like post-humanism, the idea that there will be new forms that emerge that aren't exclusively human, whether it's through hacking our genetic code, blending with technology, doing the kind of like augmentation that you were just describing, Brandon. Like that is that's already happening. And then if you combine that with the rate at which these other technologies are maturing, it's really interesting where the cutting edge will be in 5 to 10 years. It's getting really close to the singularity, and we haven't talked about the singularity in a while. But Ray Kurzweil, shout out to Ray and the singularity. Hit us up on @TrendingInEd, Ray. But yeah, wearable seats.
It's all about the solution. What problem it's solving, right? The wearable seats are solving problems, hopefully, for people with, as Brandon said, different capabilities and different medical issues. But is there a market for it beyond those people? Is there a market for everyday use and
like lazy people? Yeah.
Waiting for a bus, it can get rough.
Yeah. Sure.
You got to sit down.
Yeah.
Brandon, any other thoughts on augmented humans before we move on?
No, I think let's go on to the next bucket. The most exciting one from the language they use, the post-classical compute and comms.
That is accurate. They're talking about the next gen of computers and communication devices and how data will communicate with itself. They discuss 5G, the new cellular network that is coming or is not, depending on which article you read, at which time you read it. And then about low Earth orbit satellites, LEOs, not to be mistaken for ELO, a great band from the 70s. But you have much lower orbiting satellites to help with communication. Any broad thoughts here, Mike, on the new architectures they're talking about and how this might translate into a discussion here on Trending Ahead?
It's just interesting to think about the infrastructure that can power everything else. This is why the language is not particularly interesting. The idea that everyone will have access to things that are scarce now. So like high speed connectivity will increasingly become available everywhere through mobile devices that everyone has. So like a lot of the places that we thought of as having systemic constraints, those systemic constraints will likely be easing up. I think it's interesting to contrast that with the conversation we just had around digital inclusion, where for folks for the haves, it's going to be increasingly easy to get access to super high speed everything and really fast connections and all that. For the have-nots, I think they will be getting something. Things will continue to improve in the developing world, and stuff will still. That's really where the emerging markets are. That's what we keep looking at. Africa and Asia are where we're going to see the most growth. But I'm not sure if all of these emerging technologies will lift all those boats in the developing world quickly, but it will allow for the elite to have really amazing access to incredible services, and also incredible environments to develop against. So developing for the folks who are, who have access, I think it's going to be really interesting. And then I think there will be a carry-on effect, almost like a little trickle-down equivalent to providing new avenues of access to folks who maybe don't have them at all right now. But I see this one as more like the sort of little sneaking up on you, but the back-end infrastructure gets better. That makes everything easier to develop against. This is sort of like the platform systemic one of the trends that they outlined.
Yeah, and to go deeper on a thing that I'm probably underqualified to talk about, but I think it's super fascinating. This is the blockchain of 2019.
Nice.
Is the quantum computing piece.
Yep.
So, traditional computing uses binary bits, right? So it's something is either on or off. And the whole concept, as I understand it, of quantum computing is using a different kind of bit. So it's a qubit. So it can be a bit that can be have different states than just those two binary on off.
Uh-huh.
The application of this is tremendous. So it's just unlocking computing speed and running multiple parallel processes. So again, where these individual bits are not representing individual states. This is just building on your point, Mike, that this quantum computing, if it becomes something that is mainstream, and I my understanding is these qubits need to be kept close to absolute zero temperature, which is not in most server rooms at most places. So I'm not sure how close we are to making this mainstream, but that will underpin all of the other stuff. So machine learning, AI, like all of the things that require tremendous computational power and speed will all be made more accessible and better essentially through quantum computing. And so there's part of this compute and comms is about access and networks and getting it, with low Earth orbit satellites, getting it to people who don't have it today. I think that's really interesting too. But I would, for folks who are interested in this stuff, I think it's pretty trippy actually, to just think about how this could fundamentally change computing as we've known it for the last 50 years. And all that kind of change could unlock for us. And if you think about, Mike, you said AI is basically throughout all of this. If that is true, and it is true, then something like quantum computing could be making, in fact, every one of these emerging technologies more accessible, faster to market, more influential when it does hit market. So I think this one is sneaky interesting.
Yeah, and just building on that too, like in terms of the skill development side, like leaning into, I still think I don't know what's going on with the blockchain. There used to be a burgeoning love affair between Gartner's hype cycle and the blockchain. Now it's like they didn't even exist, So I still think the blockchain, don't call it a comeback, but I'm expecting more out of the blockchain. But it does feel like this stuff will kind of permeate. It's like the force, right? It's a force multiplier too, is another way to think about it, where Moore's law now wouldn't really even make sense in terms of quantum computing. So it does feel like some of the delimiters that are there are going to be removed if they're the kinds of breakthroughs we're expecting through quantum computing. So it's almost a call to action to all of us to sort of follow your example, Brandon, and lean in on some of these confusing areas. You may not get 100% savvy in blockchain and quantum computing, but we should all have at least passing awareness of these things. Otherwise, we're not going to stay job relevant. Some of this stuff, that's part of why hopefully some people listen to the show. Some of these ideas that are emerging, spend a little time. You don't have to go super deep. You don't need a master's degree. You don't even really need a Coursera certification, but at least understand what it is and start thinking about the long-term implications, and then think about how, you develop as a professional, how workforces are managed and trained in emerging technologies. It's really interesting stuff. And I'm glad you called that one out, because binary to quantum,
If on that note, I saw a great video over on YouTube from Wired.com. They have a 5-level series where they explain things at 5 different levels: grade school, high school, college, grad school, and then a professional. And they did one on quantum computing. So if you are interested in it, I am not an expert in the field and felt much more knowledgeable after having watched it. It does a nice job of scaffolding and building on the topic before. And they have a whole series of different topics, but quantum computing one was very good. Digital ecosystems is up next. Web-like connections, to read directly here, between actors sharing a digital platform. Brandon, maybe picking up with you here. Anything top of mind or interesting to you from the discussion points they have here about digital ecosystems?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just everything is more connected, right? So it's not just IoT; it's people and places and things. The more the more that's connected, the more valuable those connections. So I think I actually think the blockchain falls into this bucket, right? So it talks about decentralized autonomous organizations. I believe that blockchain is an example of that. And again, the power of this is in the breadth and depth of this. The more connected, the more powerful, which then invites more connections, which makes it more powerful. So the concept that we are essentially all sharing one platform, a platform I call Earth. But we are all sharing this one platform that we're variously plugged into and are going to be increasingly plugged into. I think there's real opportunity for all the things that are connected to be better because of all the things that are connected.
Yeah, just to build real quick on this one, and I think we can move on. But I just think ecosystem thinking, the word ecosystem is a good word, and it implies like systemic thinking, design thinking, like understanding at an architectural level how all the components fit together. And frequently that's when there is complexity in an ecosystem and you have to allow for that, but you also can kind of take a step back typically when you're thinking about an ecosystem as opposed to an individual thing. And I think that's important, tying it back to the learning side. Understanding the role of the humans in the learning ecosystem, I think is going to be a really interesting area for us to understand. And also this is written for chief technology officers, not really chief learning officers or folks who are trying to understand workforce development, training and development. I think there's another lens that would be interesting to talk to Gartner about is like, okay, what's the role of humans? And if you're thinking about training and developing a workforce of the future, how will they fit into the ecosystem? How will those workflows evolve? And then who has the right skills and competencies to design for the human interaction with the digital ecosystem? That stuff's really, really interesting, and obviously an area that we could dig into further maybe on another time.
The final bucket, advanced AI and analytics, might come to you here. I think the most advanced AI I ever saw was against the Lakers in the finals, but would like your take here on how this all comes to be. Of course, Allen Iverson, for those who haven't listened to the show before.
Yeah, we got to get Iverson on the show. I mean, like
happen.
it's been too long. I would say even ahead of Elon Musk has had. I mean, we all have our challenges in life, but I'd love to hear Allen Iverson's take on this because he still has advanced AI. Like he's the answer. Yeah, I mean, I think this one kind of puts the cherry on top of the sundae a bit, where if you hadn't noticed already, it's all about artificial intelligence, machine learning, that universe. I'd love to get Brandon's take.
Yeah, I think this is, again, Sundays, cherries. We've been talking about this basically throughout this episode, that the more, to pull all these things together, the more connected things are, and the more they require really fast computing, the more you can apply AI, machine learning, et cetera, solutions to all of those things. So it's of a piece with what we've been talking about. I think there is some interesting things in here. It talks about edge AI. So where, brands are using AI in sort of really creative ways to enable different kind of engagements with their product and their customers. Mm-hmm. Automated delivery of product to someone who can then open their door automatically and have an exchange that doesn't require a human on either side, I think is interesting. It talks about, or related, talks about an IoT-enabled hotel room, which can turn on your shower at a certain time, set to a certain temperature, and can set the temperature to in your hotel room already throughout all times of the day. Something that you can interact with, and then learns about you and your preferences, so that the next time you show up, you don't have to reprogram it. You can just choose settings from the past. I think that's all of that falls under the bucket for me of just making the world a more personalized and more awesome place to live. And I go back to something I said earlier on this episode about following the money. If someone is more likely to stay at that hotel, just use that example, because it is a more personalized and more awesome experience for them, that is a justification for that brand's investment in AI. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think we're going to start to see AI, although, I heart bots. AI isn't just about bots, right? It's about leveraging in a learning capacity, a tremendous amount of data that gets smarter with each use. And I think there's going to be a ton of applications for that are commercially viable, and for us as customers of the world, as end users of this technology, even if we don't see it as the AI, we're not interfacing with the code or the teams that put that together. We're just having a more curated, personalized user experience. I think that's really exciting.
And just, I love where you're going there too, because like I think the design of that, hotel of Tomorrowland is going to be a very human design problem that will likely be best handled by smart, empathetic, savvy, experienced designers who are able to leverage the full power of everything we just talked about on this show. There will probably be a time when that will also be AI empowered, but like that's also gets a little meta too. So like we will always be offloading some components of the design and the delivery to technology, but we will always be retaining a component that is uniquely human, and then trying to like navigate that blend, which is really, since our first show, that's what we've been talking about, the blend of educational technology and the power of the teacher in the classroom. It's going to get really interesting. And then the problems of access, I think, will also be interesting too, where like there still will be classrooms that, we're all embarrassed are still out there in the world, in a world that has this level of enablement and technology. Why are teachers suffering when maybe they shouldn't, and why are certain areas have access to some of this technology, others not? But when it's at its best, it does seem like the classroom of the future is going to be pretty sweet and hooked up.
A deep and robust topic here with the Gartner Hype Cycle each and every year. Good to dig into each of these 5 buckets and stories to track as the year goes on up until next year's 2020 Gartner Hype Cycle, as they seem to be focusing more and more on emerging technologies and not on working technologies or business adopted technologies. Will be interesting to see what's next. What's next on the Hype Cycle? What do they see on the horizon, and what could be around the corner? Brandon, as always, thanks so much for hopping on. Always good to have you back here on Trending in Education. Mike with great content as always. You can find us on Twitter, as Mike said, at Trending in Ed, Trending in Ed on Facebook as well. Find us on LinkedIn, Trending in Education over there. We're posting each of the episodes, starting some discussions on there as well. And of course, it's trendingineducation.com. Until next time, you've been listening to Trending in Education.